My name is Sean Fitzgerald, and I'm speaking to you today from Jasper. I'd like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging that the College of Physiotherapists of Alberta's offices are located on Treaty 6 territory, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta's Region 4, which has been and continues to be the home of many Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. The College of Physiotherapists of Alberta recognizes that Indigenous peoples have been helping many live healthy lives on this land long before settlers arrived. With that, we commit ourselves to helping move people forward in their journey towards good life and doing so in a way that follows the spirit and intent of treaty, that of peace, friendship, and understanding. We also recognize that people from across Alberta and beyond are joining us today and encourage you to take a few moments to learn more about the lands, peoples, and treaties with which you may be in relationship. It is my pleasure to welcome Monique Methot. Monique is a family violence educator at the Today Center and a social worker with a passion for prevention, education, and community building. In the past 15 years, she's worked to support strong communities through education, advocacy, and contributing to interagency initiatives such as Trauma-Informed Edmonton, the Out of School Time Collective, and the award-winning Don't Be That Guy Sexual Violence Prevention Campaign. Again, I'd like to welcome Monique, and now I'll hand it over to you. You can continue on with the presentation. Thanks, Monique.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sean. Hello, good morning. Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Monique, and I am coming to you here from Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory, Métis Nation number 4. And thank you very much for that really nice land acknowledgement, Sean. I really do appreciate it. So, and welcome, everybody. I'm very excited that you're all here with us today. So this morning, we are going to be talking about family violence. We're going to be doing an introduction workshop to family violence. If this is your first workshop on family violence, welcome. I hope you continue your learnings in the future. If you would like to learn more, definitely you can connect with the Today Center website. We've got lots of interesting resources and whatnot, or connect with me, and I would love to help you, support you on your journey to continue to learn and understand along the way. So welcome, and thank you very much for being here. All right, just a little reminder here that, you know, we are going to be talking about family violence, which can be a little bit heavy for our hearts, especially so early in the morning. So this is just a reminder to, you know, take care of yourself during the workshop. If you need to take some deep breaths, whatever you need to do to sort of ground yourself, move around, that is totally a reasonable thing and, you know, an okay thing. And if some feelings come up that you weren't anticipating, that's also totally a normal thing. You know, we are humans with emotions. And so if you need to reach out for additional supports, you know, 211 is the Provincial Alberta Mental Health Resources. Talk to a colleague or a friend and just, you know, make those connections and make sure that you are taking care of yourself while you are also learning too. So just a little bit about the Today Center where I work. So I'm in Edmonton here, as I mentioned, and for those of you who are in Edmonton and area, you know, the Today Center, we're an organization that supports people experiencing family violence. We are we tend to be working with the, you know, sort of lower to medium risk. We're not a crisis organization because we are Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but we are often a place where people can reach out to, connect with if they're just not sure of, you know, about connecting to resources, doing safety planning, as well. If you are working in a situation where maybe you might have some questions about a patient that you're working with, you can definitely reach out to us as a community consultation. If you're outside of Edmonton, you can do this as well too. We just might not have all of the updated resources in your neighborhood, but definitely we can be a resource to you around, you know, supporting you around family violence as well too, because this is a big thing. And just know that, you know, you're not alone in this and that there is a whole community of support there for you if you have some concerns about your clients, about your patients. As well, you can go to the website and look at the resources, information about what we have to offer. We also have some additional resources you could pick up, some pamphlets, also our Today booklet, which comes in 6 languages, also available on the website as well too. Also, I do the education piece, hence we're here all together today. So if you have a group that you think would be interested in some introductory understanding about family violence, such as this, or even a longer, more in-depth workshop, definitely you can reach out to me and let me know, and I would be more than happy to support you on that journey. So again, the Today Center is an option that you could refer or, invite your patients to reach out to us if they are looking for supports around family violence, the family violence that they might be experiencing in their relationships in their lives, that, we could be one of those supports for you as well. All right, we have a short time today, so we are going to get moving on the information. So in order to really, be on the same page, it's good to have a common definition around family violence. And most of the definitions are pretty similar to each other. They have a lot of similar, components to them, even though they might have a few different words that are different. But when we're thinking about family violence, we're really thinking about a systematic pattern of abusive behaviors within a relationship that's characterized by intimacy, dependency, and/or trust. So it is a established relationship. It's not a stranger relationship. Most of the time we think about this as romantic partners, but it can be other kinds of relationships that fall under that trust relationship. So sometimes even roommate situations, siblings, intergenerational or extended family relationships can also fall under that sort of model of relationship. And these abusive behaviors exist in a context where the purpose is to gain power, control, and induce fear. So that's really, when we're thinking about what's the difference between people who are in relationships that are just kind of lousy and ones where we are concerned about people's safety, it really is that, the power and control. People are using tactics to gain or maintain power in that relationship. And this often causes fear in the other, in the other people. And so that's, also something that we can look out for. If people are nervous around their partners or, express fear around, reactions to things, and that is definitely a little thing that we want to pay attention to, because fear is not just a byproduct of, the tactics of control, but that's also a central tactic to keeping that person in the relationship. And because of that power imbalance that's going on in the relationship, we don't recommend couples counseling, just because that can actually leave the targeted person more vulnerable for violence in a different way. So if somebody is experiencing violence or we're concerned, we definitely encourage them to reach out some supports and have some opportunities to talk to somebody one-on-one about what's happening for them. There is a handout. I know that I had sent them out, so I'm not sure how this is working, but there is a handout from the Government of Alberta, the Healthy Relationships one. And it's a really interesting one because it has sort of different facets of relationships on one side and what those things can look like in healthy, unhealthy, and relationships with violence and abuse. And it's a really interesting chart to sort of map out what those things can look like and can make some things really, really concrete and interesting to check out. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. That handout as well. Okay, so this is a little slide I actually borrowed from our friends in Say Jess in Calgary. This is a program called Real Talk. Highly recommend checking this one out. It's also, there's a link to it on our resources page, so if you want to quickly do that, definitely take a chance to take a moment to look. But what I really like about this is that it takes the complicated dynamics of family violence, because family violence is incredibly complicated and nuanced. Every situation is very different, and it really kind of helps us to understand some of these complications in easier ways. So thinking about domestic violence is like an iceberg. Right? So when we think about icebergs, we know that, the beautiful icebergs that we see, in the pictures and everything, that's just the top of it. But most of the bulk of the iceberg is actually under the water where we don't see it, right? And this can be similar to family violence, right? So we could have somebody who seems to be, happy and content or whatever, but on the inside they're feeling very differently, right? Or on the outside, a family seems to be, functioning and happy, but at home things are very, very different. So that's a really common understanding. One of the reasons why I like the iceberg graphic is because we think about that process of grooming somebody into a relationship where there's family violence. There are often those red flags and those warning signs, things to pay attention to or whatnot. But we want to remember that those things are purposely hidden from that person, right? So they're underneath. And one of the reasons why I like to mention that is because many times people, when they reflect back on the relationship, what's happened, many times people really do beat themselves up for this, right? There's a lot of internalization of victim blaming, and this is a huge one. So if we are in a situation where we're talking to somebody and they're reflecting and saying, oh my goodness, I'm so stupid, why didn't I see this? Look at all the signs, like I'm so dumb. All of these things, people really beat themselves up. And so that's an opportunity for us to say, yeah, those things were there, but you weren't meant to see them, right? Like this was not your fault. Anytime we can reinforce, like this is not your fault, I believe you, all of those messages are incredibly important. We're not throwing warning signs and red flags out the window, like that's not for us to do. But it's a little bit different. We want to shift how we think about those things, right? Those red flags, those warning signs are important, but they're really more important for us as supporters, us as people in the community to say, you know what, I've kind of noticed this and I'm worried about this. Is there something you want to talk about it? Bringing things to people's attention so that, they're conversation starters. They're things for us to notice and pay attention to. Also, domestic violence is like an invisible cage, right? There's lots and lots of bars in the way of people being able to, live their lives fully, for people, to access all of their freedoms as well. And some of those bars in the cage look like, they can look like, the rules in the relationship. They can be like the fear that's happening. They could be lots of different things. They could also be things like, finances. They could be access to childcare, homophobia, systematic racism, what's the perception of victim blaming in the community, right? Like there's lots and lots of things that people are facing that can make sort of a healing journey much more difficult. And that, every situation is different. And so if somebody expresses that something is difficult for them or a barrier that they, that it makes it hard and we don't get it, we just really want to honor what's happening for them and, believe that that is a thing that is making things difficult. And if we don't understand, maybe ask them how, what navigation could look like, what support could look like, all of these things, just to really honor that, there are a lot of barriers for people to reach out for help and support or access help and support as well. Also, domestic violence is like a Jenga tower. So if you've ever played the game Jenga, it's a super fun game. You stack up all the blocks and you take out the blocks and, after a while, the whole tower topples over, right? Because you've taken out lots of blocks. But it's also a good analogy because it's, people who are experiencing family violence, they really are feeling like that teetery, tottery, like tower. They're not sure when it's going to fall over. They're not sure if this is the thing that's going to make this tiny thing is the thing that's going to set everything off, right? It's intentionally destabilizing for the person. This is where that, long-term impacts of trauma also come up, right? Like that people just not feeling secure in themselves and being really focused on just sort of getting through one foot in front of the other rather than looking at those bigger pictures of things that are happening for them or supports that might be available for them. So it's a really good analogy to think about that because it really does reflect what it's like to be in a situation where there is family violence. All right. So one thing that we also want to just remind ourselves is that, people who are in relationships such as these, they are doing the best with all of the tools that they have, right? That sometimes we have maladaptive tools that work in certain situations and not in other situations, but that we really need to also honor and respect that a person's journey is their own and that they are the experts in their situation, right? That we know lots of good stuff, but their information and their stories are just as important. And so, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about that power dynamic, right? So when we're in these helping relationships, we want to not replicate that power dynamic, right? We want to really see them for the expert that's sitting there. So we want to reduce that, reduce that power dynamic and support them along their journey as much as possible. You know, give them as many options and really try to honor that we're both experts in the situation, and that will really help us along that supportive journey as well too. So this is just a list of some different tactics or types of abuse. I know that there's a handout that I sent out. Also, the handout, this one and the last one as well too, are on the resources page at the Today Center if you would like to take a look at that. And because this is just we have just a short time today, I'm not going to go into all of these things. I'm just going to touch on a couple ones that are important. And this is also not a comprehensive list, right? Unfortunately, there are many, many different tactics that people use in order to gain or maintain power and control in relationships. That this is just some groupings of them as well too. And we don't really need to worry too much about being able to label all of them. It's not a math test, right? These are just sort of categories so that we can help to recognize when power and control is being used, when people are using certain aspects to gain or maintain that power and control in relationship. We also want to remember that some things that are really impactful for one person might not even bother another person, right? So it is definitely individual. Every person is different. And that it's a very common pattern that after time, we'll have some different kinds of, tactics that are being used and that other ones may be added or integrated as well too. So it is a common pattern that we do see things changing and sort of increasing as well over time. So again, this is not a comprehensive list, but definitely check out those 3 pages. It gives you more specific examples so that you can sort of have an idea of some of the things that it might look like or some of the things that you might see or hear. Of course, it is important that we talk about emotional abuse because emotional abuse is really that foundational piece of what's going on in the relationships. You can't have any of the other kinds of tactics without it impacting who we are as a person and how we move through the world. So when we're thinking about emotional abuse, it's that pattern of controlling behaviors which creates an imbalance of power within the relationship that's used to harm or punish or scare the victim. So very similar to that family violence definition as well. This makes the victim dependent on the abusive partner by eroding their self-esteem, isolating them from their supports, depriving them of their independence, and regulating their everyday behavior. So when we're thinking about, what is kind of that ultimate goal of family violence, it really is to isolate a person or separate them from their supports, which is why, you're actually super important in that community relationship and making sure people are connected, making sure that people are receiving help, like being able to go out to see you is definitely something that's very important. And so if we're noticing people are missing appointments or making excuses, right? Like those are some things to pay attention to for people, especially if we have maybe some worries or concerns about them, that these are things that we want to notice and pay attention to them. So this also includes coercive control, which is a framework coined by Evan Stark. And his work is really interesting if you want to sort of further look at that, because it's really founded in looking at what are a person's basic human rights and how are they impacted and, by violence, by, this coercive control, by this controlling environment that people are living in. So it's a really interesting way and a different framework of thinking about what this looks like. But he describes it as the victim becomes captive in an unreal world created by the abuser and trapped in a world of confusion, contradiction, and fear. So it really does feel like that Jenga tower, right? And so lots of things to think about as well too. And that coercive control model is something that I know recently in the last few years I've definitely been talking about a lot more because it is something that is very sneaky and it is very hard to detect. It sort of goes under the radar and is often really easily dismissed as well too, where it is that sort of slow grooming process around convincing a person, to not trust their reality, right? That they, to really undermine their perception of things that are going on as well too. And so one example of coercive control is gaslighting, which you may have heard about. There's definitely a lot more people talking about this, out in the world and in social media. It's definitely changed. But gaslighting is really a tactic that really, to gain more power, it is about sort of like manipulating a person's perception of the world. It's really tricking them into not being able to trust their own thoughts and feelings, and it's done in lots of different ways, lots of things that are being said. Many times it's sort of, people like, oh, I was just joking, all of these things like, oh, you're just so sensitive, you're just insecure, oh, you're paranoid, you're the one who's making all the problems, you're the one who's initiating all the fights in the relationship, all of these kinds of things. I was just joking. This isn't a big deal. Why are you making such a big deal, right? So just really trying to minimize a person's reactions. You're always so dramatic. That never happened. Like, what are you talking about? Really trying to minimize a person's perception of what's going on, trying to change their capacity to sort of reason about things that are going on. This is a lot of the victim blaming as well, and a lot of the, nobody believes you, and this is all your fault. So a lot of that really happens with that gaslighting. And, and unfortunately, many times this gets dismissed by people who, care about us, because it's like, oh, if somebody says, oh, well, the other day, my partner called me this. It's like, oh, yeah, my partner does that too, right? But they don't realize that, so things can get minimized, but they don't realize that that person is living in this sort of larger context of oppression, right? And so sometimes little things can get dismissed by other people, but it's those little things that are symptoms of the larger oppression that's going on. So it can be really easily missed as well too. So it is a bit of a tricky one to notice. But that, there's lots of different kinds of, the emotional abuse, that lots of different kinds of controlling behaviors, and that, we want to remember that many times people equate anger and physical, anger and domestic violence or family violence, and that definitely anger is a very effective tool, but that, we want to separate those two things, that anger isn't the cause of family violence. And we can see by looking at, coercive control models, by different ways of, emotionally controlling somebody, either, through finances, through, cultural practices, spiritual abuse, through lots of different things, that we can see that, it isn't something that's about anger. It's not just because somebody's getting really angry. Many times people get the message like, if you just didn't make your partner angry, there wouldn't be any violence. But we can see through this pattern of the, the emotional abuse, the coercive control, that it's not about anger, and that, most of the abuse that's happening is that sort of very subtle, sneaky, emotional piece as well too. And that it's not very understood that when we think about family violence or domestic violence, most people really don't realize what it is, or even sort of give themselves permission to think that there's something really big that's going on, unless there's physical abuse. And it is a common pattern that family violence or, domestic violence does escalate into physical violence, but that's not the case in all situations. Again, every situation is different. It might even be that, there's one incident of physical violence and that's enough of a threat in the future that, there never needs to be physical violence because they're using that as a threat. So just because something hasn't escalated to physical violence doesn't mean that it's not important, doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's more dangerous. It doesn't mean that, we don't value what's going on, but that it is just a different form of coercion that, most of the time I think that you'll probably, in the situations that you're in, you'll probably mostly be noticing the physical abuse just because you're working with people's bodies and whatnot. Excuse me. But that, family violence, especially if there's physical abuse, does cause physical pain and injury, and I'm sure some of you have already seen this, that does cause ongoing health issues. So, definitely, if you're noticing some signs that are unusual, some, ongoing kind of bruising, ongoing kind of physical kind of abuse or pain, or things that you're concerned about, things that sort of seem, but they don't align with the reasons why people are coming to see you, those are definitely things that we want to pay attention to. Again, I mentioned, people are missing appointments or making excuses or whatnot. Sometimes people are also, excuse me, like making excuses for unusual bruising or things like that as well too. Those are some things that we just really want to pay attention to and notice and even document in some situation as well. So one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is strangulation, and strangulation identification is something that's really important, and that it is very common. Unfortunately, it is very common in situations of family violence, and that, of course, not all people because everybody's bodies are different and react differently to physical traumas, that, not everybody has physical signs of strangulation, but that we definitely, those are things that we want to pay attention to. I had sent out a handout that comes from a local nurse called Monique McLean, who gives us it's just a little handout on things to notice around strangulation identification as well too. And it's something that people are not always asked about, and if somebody is asked if they're experiencing physical violence in their relationship, they may not recognize strangulation as something they've experienced. So it is something that, we can ask people, have you ever experienced choking or strangulation? We know that, choking is a medical term. That means something's caught in, it's like when I eat a carrot too quickly, right? Like I get something caught in my mouth, like that's choking, right? And that strangulation is very different. It's about the, objects that, hands or other objects that are restricting a person from being able to breathe. And that, this is incredibly important to pay attention to. It is, one of the most deadly forms of domestic violence. And if somebody's experienced strangulation in the past, it's incredibly likely that they will experience it in the future as well. There is a pattern of people experiencing this on an ongoing basis. And that many times when people see their health practitioners, people may not always recognize this because some of those signs look like other things, like, like laryngitis or COVID or other things. So, paying attention to if you are concerned about, some of those signs, and they're all listed in that pamphlet as well too. So looking at the petechiae in the eye, sometimes there are bruising around the neck as well, tenderness around the neck. These are all things that we want to check in if somebody is really having some of those signs that there is some damage or things that we're worried about in that area as well. Sexual violence is also something that's incredibly common in situations where there is family violence, and with any kind of violence that's happening, we always want to reinforce for people that whatever they did to keep themselves safe in those situations was totally the right thing to do, right? going along with a person or placating a person, that if they're, sometimes people will say, well, I didn't fight back, I didn't do this, but, sometimes being quiet or going along with a person is the thing that keeps a person safe. So we always want to reinforce those messages that whatever you did to keep you safe was the right, was the right choice. That it doesn't mean you're complicit. It doesn't mean you're okay with it. It doesn't mean that, you're a part of it. It doesn't mean you're just as bad as the other person. It just means that's what you were doing to keep yourself safe. So always reinforcing those messages of, it wasn't your fault, that, help is available when you're ready as well, too. One thing that I'll just quickly touch on as well, too, is duty to report. So we know duty to report is that, we are all responsibility for the health and well-being and making sure children are safe and well. One thing that sometimes is a little bit misunderstood is that under the Child, Family, Youth Enhancement Act, that if we know of a child is in a family where there is family violence that is occurring, that does fall under duty to report, and that, we do have a legal obligation to report on that. And so if you, and it's always best to come from the person that's the closest. So ideally it's the person in these scenarios, the person who's experiencing the violence, or if you receive the disclosure. And if you have any questions or concerns about that, you can always do a community consultation with the Child Abuse Hotline, Children's Services. Sorry, that Children's Services is for Edmonton there, but the other two are Alberta-wide as well. And that this is, a situation where, we come up against we want to give people as many choices as possible about their journey, but this is a place where we don't have choices, right? So we can think about how we can present this, to a person and let them know that there are choices, right? Do we want to make the call together? Do you want to make a call and I'll make a call later? Like, how do we want to navigate this thing where we don't have a choice? So, but definitely if you have any questions or concerns or you're not sure if this is a reportable, you can definitely connect with, Children's Services, your local Children's Services, or the Child Abuse Hotline and just find out some more information about what that could look like. Okay. So stages of change. I think this one is a really interesting one, especially work around family violence. So this model comes from the addictions world, and it really, it really applies to any time that you're going to make a change in your life. You kind of go through these steps, right? And I mean, they're not linear. We like this tiny little diagram here, but it can go all over the place. But so when you're thinking about, and it applies really well to family violence, understanding where a person is in family violence. So if you're thinking about, that pre-contemplation stage, that's really where, maybe you just don't realize that you're going to make a change in your life. You don't realize that there's an issue. Like, it's just not on your radar, right? And like, we see examples of people who are in this stage when, people connect with us and we're like, this is a summary of the conversation. We're like, hey, how can you call today? And they're like, well, I don't know, but, somebody suggested I call because my partner, has 8 charges against them for, all of these things. And we're like, wow, you're in that pre-contemplation. You don't even know that there is, an issue that's going on, or they're just not ready to reach out for help or support at that place. Contemplation is really about, recognizing that you might be making a change in life, that there might be something going on, but it's a lot of like information gathering. It's a lot about finding out about resources, asking questions, and so lots of just trying to learn about what's happening. So just thinking about what's going on. Preparation is, sometimes making small changes. So it could be thinking about, calling a support agency. It could be about maybe prepping a go bag or an emergency kit, or talking to people about what it could look like if, making plans for changes or making small changes, right? And then action is taking action on your plan. So whatever that looks like. Often with domestic violence, family violence, it's a plan for safety. So whatever that action plan is. Of course, maintenance is maintaining, doing all those things that we want people to do to maintain that change. And then relapses, sometimes, those changes don't stick, right? And so we might fall back. Lots of times if people have tried to exit the relationship, they might go back into that relationship. So there's lots of different things that are going on with that. And that we want to, remember that when we are working with somebody, that when we're talking to somebody, if someone discloses that they're in all these different stages of change, right? As helpers and supporters and, awesome professionals in the community, that, we're firmly planted in that action stage, right? We get up and we go to work and we're like, we're going to help people and support them. And that, if we recognize where we are and recognize that people might be in different places, it can really help to, reduce kind of that tension and that stress around, okay, well, I told that person they need to do the thing, but they haven't done the thing. How come they haven't done the thing yet, right? And it could be that they're just not at that stage yet, right? Like they're just looking for information right now. They're not ready to take those big steps. So, it's important to notice this because it will help you sort of reframe what's going on and also prepare perhaps for the next time that they come in. You can give them support, you can give them information, you can give them connections to resources. And so some things that are really helpful for people, because we can't push people through the stages of change, right? People have to, the frustrating thing is that people have to move through this on their own. But things that really help people, ground them to be able to feel like they can take next steps are really powerful things, such as, believing somebody's story, giving them those opportunities to talk, just believing what they, because a lot of times people are told no one's going to believe you, you're making all of this up. So just those pieces of empathy, saying, wow, that's really scary, like I'm really worried about you, all of these different things can actually really support a person on their healing journey as well too. And that we want to remember that leaving a situation where there's family violence is not always the answer. It's not always the safest answer, which is kind of hard to understand sometimes because we want people to get away, right? Absolutely. But that sometimes, staying in the relationship can be safer than leaving the relationship, because when a person leaves that relationship, the violence often increases and gets more dangerous for a person. This is also where we see the domestic homicides, is often when people have just left those relationships. So we want to recognize that that is a dangerous thing. We want people to connect with safety planning in their communities as well too, and we can suggest that for people, that if somebody goes back into their relationship where there was violence, that people have been, they're going to get all sorts of messages like, well, you knew what you were getting into, like, oh my gosh, I guess you don't need my help anymore. Well, you're just as bad. Like all of these blaming messages that are probably just people being exhausted, right? But that if somebody goes back into a relationship with family violence, that it often decreases the violence for a little while, right? And that, of course, people are trying to protect themselves and protect their families. So it's hard to understand that this is sometimes a safety technique, but the thing that people need more than anything else is support, not judgment, right? Judgment, if judgment worked, it would have worked by now. It's not an effective strategy. So definitely if people have gone back into relationships, we want to support them, to connect them with their resources, to just, get them to reconnect with their safety planning as well too, just because it is something that people need more connections, not less connections, and we can really support the person around this, because people are also getting loads and loads of judgment, and we don't need to contribute to that. We can just, try to remind a person that, violence is not their fault, help is ready when they're available, and that, to try and connect back with those resources and supports that are available to them in the community. And that, for you as well, that, it's not your job to know everything. It's not your job to be an expert in family violence, that, that there are people out there who can support you in this. So definitely don't feel like, you need to solve a person's problem, because, people don't need that. They just need some support and help along the way. And that when we're thinking about those helping conversations, if we're concerned or worried about somebody, one of the biggest things is that we want to remember is like, who else is around, right? Because we don't want to have that conversation if it's not a safe time to do so, right? That if other people can hear, that is not a safe time to have those conversations. That we really do want to be mindful of that, right? That, of course, we want to be listening and paying attention or noticing some of those red flags, right? If we're noticing, unusual bruising, if people are missing appointments or making excuses, or maybe when their partners come to pick them up that they get really nervous and tense, like, what are some of those things that we're noticing, right? And just to pay attention to them. And the nice thing about, connecting with you all, too, is that, often people are coming back on a regular basis to see you, right? So that you might have opportunities to, have conversations in the future. And so a phrase that I like, is often, like, I've noticed this and I'm concerned, would you like to talk about it? So like, I've noticed that you have like a lot of bruising here that, is different from your injury. Like, is there something going on? Would you like to talk? And then definitely giving people an opportunity but also respecting if they don't want to talk, which can be hard as well. But, respecting a person's boundaries about not having to disclose everything also shows that you're a safe person because you're not pushing them. You're not trying to replicate that power dynamic, right? You're really honoring their journey and just setting up that, that safe space that shows a person that they are, that you are a safe person in case that they do want to disclose in the future. Also thinking about, the language that we use and how that sets up safe environments as well too, right? So questions with the word why or should are definitely valid questions, but often it can make people feel a little bit defensive, right? So we want to just reframe those questions, right? So many times people experiencing family violence get all sorts of why questions, like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Right? Like, why didn't you call the police? Why did, and it can, put people, make them feel really defensive, can make them feel really attacked. So, reframing those things around like, what do you think some of your options are? What does support and help look like for you right now? All of these things, we can just reframe those. Of course, always believe a person, saying, I believe you is one of the most powerful and important things that we can do. It really is a life-changing and, a life-saving thing is to say, I believe you is so incredibly important. Always respect their expertise. They know what's happening for them. If they, express that there's something that is struggling for them or hard for them, we definitely want to respect that as well, too. And offer resources, when they're ready. Are you interested in hearing about some resources that might be supportive for you? And also letting people, so have an idea of what the resources are for. Many times people are just like, here, call this number, this, and this. So, have an idea. Say, you talked about this. I'm concerned about some of the things you're experiencing in a relationship. You can connect with the Today Center, because they can, provide some education and support and some resources around getting you some help, and let people know that what's available and then to reach out when they're ready, right? Because we want to give that power back to them. We want to, decrease that power dynamic. We want to really give them some opportunities to make choices about their journeys, right? And it also reduces that, that thing where and I'm sure you've had this too, where you've told the client or a patient, like, you need to do this exercise or whatnot, and they come back and they haven't done it, right? There's a lot of guilt and shame around that. So, giving, in cases such as this, giving people, like, when you're ready to reach out, then, these are some resources that are helpful for you, which can be really, really supportive and a really nice way of showing that person that you really believe in them and that, that trust that they're going to make the right decisions on their healing journey as well. So these are just a couple of things, like lots of times people, when they disclose or share what's happening, our knee-jerk reaction, because, taking in all of those messages we hear in the culture all of the time. Often people are met with lots of, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening to you. Are you sure that's going on? Accidentally victim blaming messages. So, if somebody discloses something that's really hard, these are some things that we can say instead, right? Like, I believe you, you didn't do anything wrong. Thank you for telling me. This wasn't your fault. Like, you're not alone in this. There is support and help available, that, we're here for you. You can always come back. All of these messages can be really, really helpful for a person on their healing journey as well. Okay, and now I have a little video to share, and this one comes from Brene Brown, and I always like ending with this little video here because it really does, it really does remind us about what are some of those things that are really important for people along their healing journeys, because we can't do everything, we can't be everything for a person, but the things that really make a difference is just treating people with compassion and hope and caring and really giving opportunities for people to, be seen and heard as well, can be incredibly powerful. So, Sean, how do I do this here? How do we get that video clip going? Oh, do we just press it here? Oh, I think I got it. Oh, we got it, my friend. Okay.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, calm down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Oh, I like that video. Okay. Next one there. I really like that video too, because it reminds us that, these are some of the small ways that we can actually make a big difference for people, and that, lots of times when people, especially if people are involved in systems, they're not getting those basic, opportunities just to connect and be heard and be validated. So, these are very simple things that mean so much for people and really are things that help people along their healing journeys. That definitely, this is, if we can do this, we'll actually make a huge difference for people as well, too. So I hope you liked that video as well. So This little workshop is a very, very, very fast overview. So there's lots and lots more things to learn, and so definitely looking forward to hearing questions. If anybody has questions at this time, we've got a little bit of time for this.
All right, Monique, thank you very much. That was, fantastic presentation. I think feedback we've got so far from the audience has been, really quite positive. So the couple of questions that are coming in, there's some questions around resources that are available, I think. A good reminder that there are quite a few resources on your website, and that's the todaycenter.ca /resources. So you can go to that to kind of take a look through. We do have resources available as well, kind of that were paired with this presentation. So if you go to basically the handouts are in the dock at the bottom of the screen. So if you look for the icon that looks like a piece of paper with writing on it, there are several there that you can download straight from here. But if there's something else that you're looking for, you may find it at the Today Center website as well. One question we did have more specific to the resources, do you have any resources that are more specific for those staying in relationships that there is dementia-related violence?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is typically, so I'm just going to make the bold assumption that that is for somebody who is an older person, that there is, here at Edmonton, I hope you're in Edmonton, that there is a group called the Seniors Protection Partnership, as well as the EARS. If you look at EARS, it's elder, oh my goodness, I've forgotten the acronym, but if you type in EARS and seniors, that they are a group that you can reach out to help for support for, that they specialize in supports for seniors. Definitely, I mean, the Today Center or even John Howard Family Violence Center, we can all support, different levels of support, but that Seniors Protection Partnership or the elder resources, the EARS line is also another place that you can get some support. Even if you're outside of Edmonton, you can still connect with EARS around asking questions and around that, because it definitely does have some complications. And there are times where, it's not uncommon for a person who is older to be sort of gaslighted or coerced into thinking that they have dementia. So there is also that kind of a thing. But if they are experiencing dementia and you're worried about violence, I would connect with the Seniors Protection Partnership or the EARS Seniors Protection Partnership. I hope that answers your question. Oh, thank you. Yes. EARS, yes, that is, Leanne's just put something in our little chat here. Yes, that is the CSS Alberta. It is. Thank you, Leanne. That's the resource. Anything else, friends? I just gave you a whole bunch
sorry,
of...
I was on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, they gave you a whole bunch of
information.
That's okay, Sean.
Yeah, so we do have another question that came in. I think kind of this is something that we get as well, like in our role of practice advisors within the college. So if there is, incidences where you suspect or that there's domestic violence or family violence occurring, when is there a duty to report? And especially more kind of along the lines like adult versus child, like when is there a duty to report as a physiotherapist if something has been disclosed to you?
So there is no duty to report relationship violence if there's no children involved. There is never a duty to report around that. The duty to report is if we know or suspect a child is being harmed in a family, either by their parent, their caregiver, their proxy caregiver. If there is family violence in the family, even if the parent says they're never home, they're always at school, they're always sleeping, because of the impacts of child development, we know that they are being impacted, and so that because of we know how that affects children, intervention is important. So anytime we suspect does fall under duty to report. If you're not sure, it is okay to do a community consultation with, children's services, either your local children's services office or the child abuse hotline. Definitely reaching out to ask questions is completely appropriate to do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So just some other ones that are coming in. So I think you talked quite a bit, and I think the information was great about providing like a safe space. So you talk more about individual one-on-one stuff. Is there things that a clinic setting or a practice setting can do to kind of let, I think, the people that are trafficking kind of in and out of that space to know that, your clinic or your people that are working there are potentially open to, discussions or disclosure, that they're there to support you? Is there things more in that bigger picture that a space can do or a practice setting can do?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, definitely being respectful of people's boundaries, asking permission to touch bodies, being respectful of pronouns, all of these things that just sort of create safety, maybe having posters up in the clinic around support and help, giving, making sure that if people are in spaces that, we're not asking questions if other people can hear. I think just about being really respectful of person's boundaries, saying, if there's anything that you want to discuss, you can ask, you can sort of say general things, if it's safe to do so. And, we can have are there any concerns at home? Like, is there anything you want to share with me? I think just being open and honest and friendly and respectful of people's boundaries, and having materials that are available. So if you're interested in any, brochures around the Today Center, we have lots of those materials or things like that, or other things that are in your community. Definitely, there's a lot of, seemingly, helpful prevention campaigns that have, pictures of people with black eyes and things like that, right? Like, we want to avoid things like that. So we want to really focus on things that are supportive and helpful, and, messages of, we're here to listen when you're ready, all of these kinds of things. We really want to avoid sort of scare tactic campaigns. So like the I Believe You campaign, which is something from the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Centers, is a beautiful campaign, and there's great those would be beautiful to put up, because it's all about being supportive and helpful. So really positive things that create safe environments, not things that are kind of more scare tactic-y kinds of things. So those are a couple of things I would do.
Thanks. And then just one last question before we, think, finish off. If there was one kind of key message that you wanted people to really kind of take away from this presentation, what do you think is that key message for you?
My key message is always, believing people, giving a chance to, the most important and powerful thing that we can do, which is often devalued by other people because it doesn't feel like we're doing anything. It's like, don't worry so much about the problem solving, but just saying, I believe you, respecting a person's boundaries, when you're ready, this wasn't your fault. Help is ready when you're available. So it's that whole believing you, if somebody tells us something that's hard, being like, wow, that really is hard. Like in the Brene Brown video, when she said, even if you don't know what to say, you can be like, wow, that was really big. I don't know what to say right now, but I'm just so happy you told me. Those are kinds of things. If I were to wave a magic wand, I would love it if everybody watched that video before we all went to work, right? Just to be grounded in, right? Ground yourself. And also remember that, we have hard times as well too. And that if we're struggling with something, we want to reach out for help and support so that we are grounded in a place, so that we are calm and helpful, and, and so we can be that supportive person. So, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, lean on your supports, and just, believe people when they share things that are hard.
Well, thank you very much. For
5 things in one.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, Monique. It was, like I said, I think the feedback we've got from people is it's been very well received, and I think we've all, learned something we can kind of take back to our daily practice. So thank you very much for your time and energy kind of putting this together, and no more questions are coming in, so we're going to sign off. But thank you very